America's economy is a two-sided coin. One half is a resurging stock market, and on the other, we have struggling small businesses trying to weather this pandemic and the restrictions that come along with it. Last night, our Jeff Wagner got an economic forecast from the CEO of the Federal Reserve Bank of Minneapolis, Neel Kashkari. Here's an extended version of that interview.
Was there concern over, the president getting such a diagnosis that I often hear the stock market is based on outlook, based on hope. To see him recover, to see our leader recover in such a way, what did that mean for our country's outlook, if you want to look at it specifically via the stock market? I know him getting healthy doesn't necessarily help the small business owner, but we didn't really see a dip until today based on other announcements. What did that mean to see him recover and not get in poor health?
Well, I think as all Americans, we should want our elected leaders, whoever they are, whatever party, to be healthy and to be able to serve their constituents and their country. To me, the markets, there's been a bit disconnect between the real economy and what the stock market has been showing. We still have more than 10 million Americans out of work. I mean, this is still a historic recession, historic cut of jobs and loss of jobs and loss of small businesses. And we are a long way away from a full recovery. I mean, many Minnesotans are out of work. Many Minnesota businesses, many restaurants, many small businesses have had to close. And unfortunately, there are many more still in the pipeline likely to close. That's why we have to get control of the virus.
What is that disconnect? I was going to ask about it because we hear so often small businesses are still struggling. Retail, restaurants, hospitality, transportation when it comes to the airline industry and rail lines. Yet white-collar jobs that are typically in the office setting have gone on business as usual, although via Zoom and at home, their lives have continued on the same, where the people that were already maybe struggling and living paycheck to paycheck have been hurt even worse by this pandemic. So what is that disconnect where one sector, one part of the country is struggling and continuing to struggle while others have been able to thrive, so to speak, especially those dependent on the stock market?
Well, I think you're right. I mean, here I am. I've been working from home. I'm in my basement in greater Minneapolis. And many of us who have those white collar jobs, just like you said, we've been able to work just fine. And people have described it as a K-shaped recovery. Some people recovered very quickly or never even went down, and others are still struggling. I think that's exactly right. And you look at the stock market, the big tech companies that are thriving in this online environment, they're the ones who are benefiting the most. In many cases, they're driving the stock market, and that's why you're seeing this disconnect. So this downturn is deeply unfair, and the economy in terms of who it's affecting. And then, of course, the thousands, the hundreds of thousands of Americans now who've lost their lives and the many more who've gotten sick. It's just a deeply unfair crisis.
So is it almost a shell of a statement to say the economy is bouncing back and arguably has never been better when it comes to the stock market, when we know for a fact that there are still people without jobs and there are still industries, businesses are still closing?
Absolutely. I mean, I think so many small businesses in Minnesota and around the country have been devastated by this. I've been surprised in Minnesota, some world-class restaurants that have been blue chip, really successful restaurants have shut their doors permanently. And every one of those small businesses that shuts its doors permanently, that means it's going to be a much slower recovery for the economy as a whole, because there's going to be a vacant restaurant there now for 6 months or a year or 2 years until some new business moves in and then hires new staff to get the economy moving again. And so unfortunately, we're a long way from out of this. I guess my prediction is we probably have 9 months to a year left of this type of economy that we're in right now until we have a widely available vaccine, and then we'll all be confident that it's safe to go back to normal.
Is there concern if we do too high of a stimulus package? Sometimes I feel like we hear money just doesn't grow on trees. We can't just print more money, but here we are talking literal trillions of dollars that the federal government is coming up with to then give to the American people. Is there concern for the outlook years from now of what we're doing to ourselves by giving out all this money, trillions of dollars, when our country has had debts of our own?
Well, long term, we definitely have to get our fiscal house in order. There's no question about this. But the United States government has this extraordinary power. It has this fiscal power to do what it needs to do in a crisis to support the American people and to support the American economy. So we're talking about a fiscal bridge, so to speak, of another 9 months, another year, until we can get this pandemic behind us. The US government has the strength to be able to do that. Then we get the economy on the mend, we get back to full strength again. And then, yes, we definitely have to get our fiscal house in order over the long term. But in this acute crisis, the right thing to do is to use our fiscal strength to support the economy, to support the American people and small businesses.
It's easy for us to look at the pandemic as having the greatest impact most recently on our economy, but right here in Minneapolis, in Minnesota, in places like Louisville, where racial tensions, issues with police relations have come up to an extent that have also been life-changing and just regionally changing. We look at what happened here with George Floyd. What has been the impact of the results from that in terms of police and community relations, changes in state government on laws, and what that means for our economy as well, related to what's happened kind of ever since George Floyd's death?
Well, it's an enormous issue, enormously important issue. We've had these terrible economic disparities in Minnesota, around the country, but especially Minnesota, for a long time. And we have not made any progress in closing them. And that's why, as I think you know, former Supreme Court Justice Alan Page and I are advocating for amending Minnesota's constitution to create a civil right for every Minnesota child, every white child, every black child, every brown child, every Native child, to get a high quality public education. My view is, if you want to close these disparities, economic disparities, housing, criminal justice, closing education disparities actually helps in all of those dimensions. And so I think as a state, we have a gut check moment after George Floyd's killing. Are we really serious about closing these disparities? I hope we are. I believe most Minnesotans want to. I think we should use this moment, to seize the moment and make the changes by making sure all Minnesota kids get a quality public education.
Keep watching CBSN Minnesota for continuing coverage.